All right. And welcome back to Zero Signal Podcast, the number one podcast in cybersecurity. Stu, how was your holiday break?
It was eventful. We moved house. So new year, new background, same me, but new background. My wife has done an incredible job making it look like I have style, which we know is a lie. But it was good just getting settled. I'm 80-90% out of boxes, which I think is pretty good in a week's turnaround. But yeah, very good holiday. How about you?
That's awesome. And did Santa know where to go?
Santa, long story. Santa found his way to the new house, and
Good.
the Barbie dream house was exactly where it needed to be. So everybody was happy.
Amazing. Love it. Love it.
Santa knows these things.
That's the magic of Santa. All right. Well, dude, I'm really excited for today's episode. We've got a lot to cover. And one of the nice things is that as we're a couple weeks late for predictions, we've actually had some really people that you and I respect and friends of the pod drop their 2026 predictions. So for those who are listening to today, you're going to be like, really? Predictions the second week in January? That's old hat. So the good news is what we're going to do is Stu and I are going to lay out our predictions at the end of today's episode. But what we're going to do as we step into this is we are going to walk through 10 predictions, themes that have emerged from some of the best and brightest when it comes to AI and cybersecurity. We'll give a commentary, and then we'll lay out our predictions at the end. So stay to the end of the
Nothing
podcast.
like critiquing others' works who are far smarter than I am.
Exactly. Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
That's it.
All right, let's get into it today then. All right, so let me step with the first thing here. So again, we've got 10 predictions across 6 different individuals that I very much respect, and a few of them have been on the podcast as well. So the first one I wanted to bring in was Madison Morne. Madison Morne is the National Security and Critical Infrastructure Advisor at Worldwide Technology. She, in her career, had run for elected office. She was a congresswoman, and she really specializes in a deeper understanding of critical infrastructure and cybersecurity's implications on there. So I'm going to read out 2 of her predictions, and then Stu, I want to get your take on this. But what I really loved is she highlighted 2 things that are really important for this coming year. She's predicting that AI cascading failures across infrastructure is going to be a material issue. And she goes on to say, where a single compromise of a poorly governed AI agent, which triggers a trusted autonomous response across a tightly coupled system, would lead to negative consequences. And I think it's really interesting that when we think about the critical infrastructure, because it is so tightly managed that if you introduce something that acts poorly, it can have this huge consequence. And the second thing, of course, is she said the AI supply chain compromise will overtake 0 days. Interestingly, that was a theme that I saw across a lot of the people that we're going to represent on today's podcast, is this idea that supply chain compromise is going to be more impactful than your classical 0-day exploitations. So Stu, what were your thoughts on Madison's calls for this year?
First of all, Madison was a nearly podcast guest, so shout out Madison. We can work out the logistics in Las Vegas, so we'll class her as friend of the podcast until we upgrade to podcast guest. Look, I think from a critical infrastructure perspective, I think there's an inevitability here that when unleashed, the ramifications will be far more serious because I feel like the underlying technology under the critical infrastructure makes the least sense. It's basically like you have some of the most important things held up by a tiny server farm in Minnesota for like some of the craziest, most important things that makes this country run and keeps order. But if you take the banking system out of it, once we have problems with critical infrastructure, that's where, like as humans, we are so tight to chaos. Like the levels between anarchy and calm are like one day of no power, and I'm scared. Like, and in the same way as if the bank shut down. And I think I'm not entirely sure that this is the year where it happens. I think there is an inevitability there, but I also think that when this happens, and I mean, it already happens across critical infrastructure anyway, and it's where nation states are most interested in playing in our systems. I don't necessarily know if something huge will happen this year. I think we might start to see some bubbles, but when it does, it will actually create the biggest change to how we think about the deployment of deployment of AI across all technologies. I don't know. What do you think?
So I remember Colonial Pipelines 2 years ago.
Yes.
They're in and
Yep.
around. That for me, I think was a good example, a good corollary to bring into here because what happened with Colonial Pipelines is they had a ransomware attack. Ransomware was not novel. We've had a decade plus of ransomware, but it finally showed up in a material way in the energy supply sector, deeply coupled with critical infrastructure. So when we saw that happened, it definitely shook things into gear. It wasn't for a lack of knowledge. It's not the industries around critical infrastructure didn't know how to protect against that caliber of threat or that particular type of weaponized code. What it was the lack of incentives, right? So you have a environment that needed something to say that only responded when the risk was realized and was clear and present, and the accounting of the financial risk was really clear. So once we got that, then we started to see a lot more change happening in the cybersecurity posture of these companies. So you're right. I think I'm going to join you with that prediction that this won't be the year that we see the Colonial Pipeline version of this. We'll probably see proof points along the way, which then smart people will leverage this and say, we actually do need to prioritize AI governance and AI security and be really thoughtful when we bring it into around critical infrastructure because the stakes are so high when we get it wrong.
Correct. It is just a different, like the layer of a SaaS tool being down versus not being able to get power are so far, and like it's so far apart. And we just don't realize. We feel like it's equally important on the defender side. It's not. The other thing I would say about the Colonial Pipeline piece is like after that, they tried to hire a CISO for 120K. And that was one of the, again, going back to the incentives and how this is viewed in, I guess, across that industry is like the education gap is pretty far afield. I remember that, and it got a pretty bad backlash. Talk to me about your thoughts on the AI supply chain piece.
So we've got a few other people. I want to kind of save this one. I'm going to tease that one a little
Cool.
bit because
Next.
we've got
Yep.
a lot happening there. That said, though, for anyone who's listening and wants to dive a little deeper, we're going to share out this deck, our predictions deck, so you can hold Stu and I accountable. But also, we've linked to the pod of the 23 podcasts we've dropped so far. A lot of these themes start to rhyme. And so in this particular case, I really think you go listen to Sandy Dunn's from CISO from SPLX. Her interview she had with us back at Black Hat. She had some really important things to say around this topic, and we've linked off to her episode as well. All right, let's jump into Nicole's. Well, Nicole Kerrigan is the SVP of Security at Darktrace, and she shared her cybersecurity trends to watch for 2026. Again, you can I've linked to the full prediction for anyone who wants to go read the whole prediction she put out. But one of the things that she really has underscored and been a pretty consistent voice around is this notion that agentic AI is going to be the next big insider risk. So she says in 2026, organizations may experience their first large scale security incidents driven by agentic AI behaving in unintended ways, not necessarily due to malicious intent, but because of how easily agents can be influenced. AI agents are designed to be helpful, they lack judgment, and operate without understanding of context or consequence. This makes them highly efficient and highly pliable, the problem there being in their pliability at the end. So I thought this was a pretty good take for 2026 and something
Yeah.
that resonated with me. But Stu, what's your thoughts here?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think we always think about insider risk and insider threat as like malicious intent, like just because of the language we use. Um, and I think that necessarily the case here is like how can and again, like if we look at historical insider threat, people are blackmailed and manipulated by outside parties, right? Like, so I think like if we're looking at who, and for those listening in, who with Bunny Rabbit is, which is AI agents are not a who, but can they be for the right level of reward, because AI agents almost are driving towards that. What is their reward function? And they historically push towards that. Like, how can we manipulate that? So I think this is a pretty good take. And I think again, everything is just so early, and we haven't seen like really a huge deployment of AI agencies. I feel like businesses are starting to feel more comfortable doing it. But again, like then you have businesses that are rolling out, and Nicole has an incredible pedigree and is very well known. When people say this, like CEOs are taking these types of predictions seriously because it's like, hey, we don't know what this agent is doing and what it's being driven to behavior wise. And I think it's a perfectly fair take. I'm sure that there's some incredible minds that say that the same can happen for humans, if not worse, because we are stupid too, if not stupider. Um, but the lack of reasoning, I think, and that context is probably the biggest fear for everybody.
So that's a good point. So let's talk about that. I mean, we know that we have this idea of an insider threat, and you're right to distinguish between that and what the Verizon data breach report and others have often labeled the accidental insider, where someone makes a mistake, whether it's a legitimate just mistake or they click on the phishing link, the threat actor takes the compromised credentials and then they run with it. We've introduced this softer language around the accidental insider. But I do believe it is worth being clear that I also agree with in 2026 that we will see agentic AI take action and be like and do the things that you would expect from a compromised insider. Because when you think about a true malicious insider, whether it was employees who have whether it's employees with access who have done something malicious, some headline items that have been around. Was about 18 months ago. Tesla in one of their gigawatt factories had an insider go through. And what do? You're basically taking a set of entitlements, an identity. You're taking the ability to take action and you're compromising the intention behind it. And you are persuading someone either with a carrot or a stick to do something differently. And I think we'll see this. And I think what's going to lead to this insider risk that's led by what I'm now going to start calling synthetic insider risk. The synthetic insider risk will happen more next year because this is the year where the early majority of enterprises will adopt agentic AI for core business flows. Like last year, we were feeling it out. Largely, we've become okay with it. It's no longer as novel a phrase to use. And so we're going to see more companies. And just by the sheer virtue of more agents doing more business operations, there'll be a larger attack surface and
Correct.
there'll be more for a threat actor to compromise. So I think that's going to play into this too. It's not necessarily that there'll be a degradation in technology, quite the opposite. I think it's going to get better. But I think the attack surface is going to get significantly bigger. And then we will lead to our first major headline items of agentic AI being exploited like an insider. So a synthetic insider.
Yeah.
So before we jump to our next one, again, I think DeSesdi had some really good commentary on this at the podcast when we were in Back of Black Hat. So I encourage everyone to go check a look at that episode. In that episode, she talks about how you can never really have a secure LLM because in the generative AI space, you always have this expansive attack surface around it. She goes into incredible detail and it's really worth listening to. And I think that for me lays out the architecture of the problem and colors the problem space and leads me to believe that like this will never be a problem to be solved. It'll be a risk to be managed.
Yes.
All right. So we are rolling through it. So we're going to get Greg's take on 2026. So Greg is a good friend of mine, a security leader I really respect. So Greg Notch is the chief security officer at Expel. Expel is a tier one MDR provider doing managed detection and response. He called out that will see automated weaponization of day one vulnerabilities. He goes on to say that AI driven patch diffing mean the difference between the AIs and the ability to get a patch out the door means attackers will build exploits faster than you can deploy the patches. And it will lower the expertise barrier to do that, meaning the exploitation. We're not losing because we lack tools or talent. We're losing because the incentives favor the attackers. 2026 will be the year won't be the year this changes, but at least we can stop pretending otherwise and move to solutions that address this. So Greg is never one to pull punches,
Mince
and I
words.
always
Yep.
appreciate and love him for that. So Stu, what's your take here?
Look, the common theme is that the incentive always lays on the other side, right? And I think we'll go into some of my takes in a little bit, is like, what are we incentivizing right now as defenders? Because we are defenders, or at least the people that we think are in our industry are built to defend and protect. this is very much a life just got so much easier on the other side of the fence. And I'm sure you're about to talk about it pretty quickly, but CVE Genie is a good example of how we're looking to kind of fight this situationally. But right now that doesn't exist in the public, and we're not incentivized to kind of move forward with that. And so I think, like, yeah, this is good for the weaponization and for the bad guys. We haven't found the way that this makes sense on our side, and so the incentives are not driving that. And again, like, humans and LLMs drive towards what makes most from an incentivization perspective. And I think Greg is right. We're not driving the right incentives to make this work.
So I hope that we do. I'm right there with you. Incentives drive behavior. They always have, they always will. Threat actors will always have a hand up because the incentive is so clear, right?
Yes.
It's super simple. Effort in, cash out. Did it work? Okay, try something different. It's not hard. Excuse me, it's not complex.
No.
So but what I really appreciated when we walked into that conversation that we dropped with the founders of CVE Genie, um, what he was highlighting there was that he's not created just a tool, and his team didn't create just a tool to take open source code and then take a written description of an exploit and then generate an exploit for less than a cup of coffee, which is what horrified me. The episode was so enlightening because what he did is he laid out this framework, which came out from him. He laid out this alternate perspective where if you actually followed it to its to the next logical steps, but through the eyes of the defender, what we've actually done in tools like CVE Genie is they've given us the ability as defenders to now programmatically go through our applications, our code, our systems, and say, can AI with the right scaffolding show up to validate the exploit, generate the patch, get it deployed, and get into production? The data says yes, you can do this, and the project CVE Genie proves this. The problem is going to be going back to the incentives. Are we as defenders, as CISOs, going to be brave enough? And I believe this year we will start to be, to say we're actually going to move away from our patching from being, we have to have a human pull something down, review it, and click deploy, to saying, okay, we're going to move this to an agentified process where the AI agent will be something that's going to read in the descriptions from the CVE that comes in, look at the code base, see it's a problem, generate the right fix, get the patch out the door. So I think this could be, the optimist in me says this could be a really good year where defenders think differently about vulnerability remediation, and we stop trying to do things on a 30, 60, 90-day cadence. Instead, we realize that game is gone. Everything's measured in hours and days, not weeks and months. So we need to agentify this process. We as defenders are be giving the tools. We're like arriving with the tools this year. So the question is going to be, will the incentive structure be there to move the security community to adopt this pretty aggressively? So
I think you're right for about 20% of the community.
yes. And there's data behind that, right? If you look at the adoption curve, the classic crossing the chasm way of looking at the world, you have your innovators, you have your early adopters, your early majority, late majority, and laggards. This 2026 feels like a bridge year for me, for many of these technologies, where we're moving from the innovators and early adopters, and we're getting at the early majority. And that's a long climb. So
I think this is probably
that
2-3 years. Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot to do there. But yeah, so I do agree with him that patching is gonna have to be done totally differently because threat actors have the leg up because of the incentive structure. And you don't have to look far. We can look back at Anthropic's report from November that they
I
dropped.
think it was December. I don't even think it was that long ago. Just feels like forever ago, like a month ago.
When they demonstrated that threat actors using Claude orchestrated an attack sequence for 30 different companies end to end, and humans were just there at pivotal moments for decisions and being person in the loop. So humans did the strategic work and made the big decisions, and the agentic systems were organized to do the exploitation from end to end. So the technology is definitely there for the threat actor. The technology is also there for the defender. It's just going to be, are we willing to think about this problem differently and bring in different technologies to solve it? All right, let's jump to the next one. This one, I thought Crystal did an incredible job here. So Crystal Morne is the senior cybersecurity strategist at Sysdig. She dropped the blog right for the holidays called the Top 10 Ways to Get Breached in 2026, which I thought was a fun spin on this. Everyone else is giving their predictions on what's going to go wrong. She's like, this is how you're going to get breached. So she went through a handful of things in her layout and her, excuse me, in her blog. I really thought it's really worth the read. Again, we've linked to this. Take a look at it. But one thing that she highlighted, again, the common theme we've heard is around supply chain risks. So here she says, this supply chain risks was a repeating horror story of 2025. Supply chain attacks went mainstream again, and their impacts were faster and wider. Thousands of organizations were impacted by flaws in individual packages because modern build processes are often able to take to many different services and require credentialed access. This interconnectedness and complexity is why the Shia LaHood worm was so successful. And we've linked to some threat research and threat intelligence around that, if you want to dive deeper in Shia LaHood. She goes on to say the supply chain attacks will persist in 2026, but beyond libraries and APIs from vendors, expect to see AI model hubs, prompt libraries, plugins to hit the headlines as well. Vendor risk will continue to be a struggle as regulatory bodies push for transparency, and your organization is stuck relying on trusting the unseen security practices of somebody else. So I think there's a lot to unpack in her article that she dropped at the beginning of the year,
Yep.
but I really like this emphasis on supply chain risk because she's right. I firmly implement this. When we get to my predictions, I've got some commentary on that as well. But I think the supply chain inside from a software perspective is again going to be a brittle part of our ecosystem that's going to get exploited.
Do you think 2025 was like one of the biggest years where we realized how powerless like we are when certain things, I guess 2024 we had CrowdStrike, and then last year we had pretty much every cloud provider, Cloudflare, AWS, and Microsoft had a spin. Do you think it, like again, I agree with the take. Do you think anyone's going to do anything about like do you think businesses are doing anything about it or going, I'm sure that Amazon won't do it again? Like what do you think?
So yeah, we have to separate the world between like the consumers of the platform and the creators of the platform. So you have your AWS, your Cloudflare, these massive backbone technologies. They've got one set of incentives, requirements, and structure, and you've got the consumers who are built on top of them. Um, 2026 will not be the year that we feel powerless. I think what it's done in 2025 is we've started to see proof points of the brittleness of the underlying technologies that power our economy. With that brittleness requires businesses to start thinking for themselves, how are they going to build out resiliency? And what it
Yeah.
has shown us is that you can't wholesale outsource all of that to a third party. You can't just say AWS has got it, I'm good forever, or don't worry, this has X amount of engineers in the open source community who are contributing patches to this open source project. I won't worry about it. Somebody else has got it. I think if you're looking at it both from like a component level inside of software, you're looking at a provider level from infrastructure, we've seen an incredible amount of complexity come up. With complexity, generally brittleness follows. And so I think they're going to be the companies who are going to have a zero tolerance for going down, the companies who are going to really try to push forward and gain more competitive edge in
Yes.
26 are going to look at resiliency as part of that annual strategy, and they will start to do something about it. And
Yeah.
that will vary for each company.
Yeah.
But it is going to depend on who that company is and the value of that resiliency because there's a
Of
cost
course.
to being resilient.
I mean, we talked about we did an episode on this, and we talked about the two betting sites, right? One was down, one wasn't. People need to bet. Went from one to the other because and then you get customers. Like it's hard to get customers, and when someone has changed, they don't come back. So the cost of being down, there would have been a real dollars and cents issue, and then people just stick around until something goes down, and that again, the incentive to move, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
The customer acquisition cost often, like for whatever reason, like isn't made clear enough in the breach when you're costing out a breach, it's
Yep.
exactly about that. It's not about the downtime. It's about the total long tail impact of that.
Yes.
And it's about the financial part of that component is the financial cost to go get those customers back again. The customer
Yeah.
acquisition cost for most companies is the principal hurdle they have to overcome. right?
Correct.
It's your classic CAC divided by LTV. If you can make that work, great. But why go triple your customer acquisition cost? And an
Yes.
outage is a great way to go blow up that cost. Awesome. So for those who want to dive a little deeper, again, read Crystal's entire article. We've got it linked. And also specifically around software security and getting into the supply chain, Clint did a really great interview with us back at Black Hat. Checked his out. He, of course, is the author of TLDR Stack and the head of research over at SemGrid. All right, let's get to one of our podcast friends of the pod, one of our favorite friends here, Daniel Measler. Daniel is the founder of Unsupervised Learning. If you don't know what unsupervised learning is, you've been living under a rock. Go check it out. He laid out I said him and his agentic infrastructure laid out a great set of predictions for 2026. I did not copy them all in here. I just grabbed 3 that really resonated with me. Let me just talk to all 3 of these and I'll get your take on them. And Stu, it'd probably be good to also remind everyone about the conversation we had in Black Hat with him, because I think I'm still shocked by
Still
that
sad.
meeting.
Still upset.
Exactly. So let's do 3 things. He predicts in 2026, there'll be more spend on agentic security platforms as a way to augment security teams. He thinks that's where the dollars are going to go. We're going to see more generalized platforms used by cybersecurity teams as a method of augmenting the human talent we have. The second thing he goes on to say is top security talent will be in extreme demand. So if you're top security talent who has the organizational skills, coding skills, AI skills, and great communication skills, you'll be in extreme demand. The next 2 tiers of talent, where you're just a little bit marginally not as good as the top tier, whether you're moderately talented or more moderately experienced, more moderately broad skilled, we'll see massively more pressure because the top tier are going to be so much more effective. So we're going to start to see a striation in the workplace. A third thing was AI security vendors are going to consolidate and generalize to be more general agent platforms instead of specific point solution. So this is an interesting take. I don't know if I entirely agree with him yet in this. Typically, Daniel sees around the curve a little farther than I do. So maybe he's seeing something that'll arrive in a time horizon that I'm not thinking about. But I don't think I'm there with him on number 3. But Stu, what are your thoughts here?
So Daniel also takes bolder takes, right? He's not going to sit on the fence. So I think anticipate that. I think, look, let's go where I'm the smartest, I would like to think, which is the security talent piece. So I put my hiring predictions out yesterday that were a bit more specific to hiring than kind of the wider cybersecurity market for the podcast. I delicately put it that I think there are some people in this industry that haven't upskilled, that were very good at their job 5-7 years ago, found themselves in a comfortable situation that might not find work again. Like, I think there is and it's not fun to say, but it is a truth that there are certain people who are so far removed from the modern way of doing security that changes every 30 minutes, it feels like. And there was the difference between those who have invested in upskilling and staying curious and staying current, and those that haven't. It will be like as drastic as, hey, they might not get as good jobs or pay, to like there are certain people that just won't find work again. And to Daniel's point, there are people who are in incredibly high demand that will receive incredible compensation packages that is that of 5 of people in bucket 2, and they are still more effective and more efficient. And so the divide between the haves and the have-nots will grow. My company will make a lot of money. We're incentivized to find the haves. And that's where, we are focusing our efforts. And we'll talk about what some of these people might look like in the coming years as part of my predictions. But Daniel's politely saying is that there are some people who might not find work in security again. When he says increased pressures, it means increased pressures to find a job or get work. And that is probably true.
Yeah. There's that thing of like the 10x engineer, right? We use that terminology all the time.
Yeah.
We're quickly heading into the world of the 100x engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between a 100x engineer and a 1x engineer, like, it's just gonna be that much more stark. So I very much agree with that. He laid out some really interesting things around in his long podcast where he talked about just both this technological train that's going forward, everything we just spoke about, some of the societal frictions this is going to cause, and some things are going to try and slow down that train. Ultimately, he believes they won't be able to derail the train. The train is going to keep going. So, well, good opportunity to go back and listen to his conversation in full. Because if I was to summarize Daniel's work over the last 9 months, it would be something along the lines, the themes are still the same. It's getting more precise because he's getting more real, right? Kind of, we're all catching up. Reality is catching up to where he thought we would go. And
Yeah.
he's largely been very right on predicting where this is going. So,
He makes it sound so much scarier as well, just with his aura. But look, I think with his angle, I think technologically he's right. I feel like society is more stubborn. And the timeline, I think the overall idea is right. Personally, I disagree with the timelines. I think these things will take longer, um, just because humans are so less susceptible to change. There is an inevitability.
Mhm.
I think the timelines are a little bit more stretched, in my opinion. And Daniel's smarter than me.
So, everyone, I do encourage you to check out his full set of predictions on his website. Again, we've got a link to it in the deck that we'll share around as well. All right. Last of our guest industry prediction guests before we turn the mic to um, Stu and my
The
predictions.
hosts.
Let's talk about so James Renathi is the founder and CEO of Latio Technology. He's an industry analyst and he does a pretty good job of understanding, I'd say a very good job of understanding how the vendor space is moving and is a really good resource for security leaders who are trying to make sense. Think of it like, your Gartners, your Forresters, but only far more targeted, going much deeper and really helpful understanding the market space there. So he highlighted two things. And again, he's coming at this more from where is the cybersecurity technology market and how is the vendor side changing? And this is important for security leaders because, of course, it's vendors that give us the leverage we need to achieve our mission. So he talked about two things. One is AI vulnerability remediation and prioritization. Again, a theme that we've heard from some of the earlier in the episode. But he goes on to say the emerging continuous threat exposure management, the CTEM category, was really weird for startups in 2025. 2025 saw many vulnerability management startups consolidate with buying vendors ranging from applications to cloud to network security. The newer solutions will have a more narrow scopes tied directly to budgetable outcomes for teams that understand the importance of AI vulnerability remediation and risk prioritization. So let me linger here for a moment. In Daniel's predictions for 2026, Daniel Measler, he also goes on to say, because of agents, we will finally be able to do attack surface management for the first time properly. And that directly ties into the CTEM category. So I think these two things really sit on top of each other. And the other one here was around developer endpoint security. I personally believe that he's 100% right on this. We've largely completely forgotten that about the developers' endpoints. He goes on and says developer endpoints continue to face dismal security standards, with many teams having no real way to know what their attack surface looks like on these devices. From MCP servers to open source malware to developer laptops are more exposed than ever. And he's so true. And it's
Yeah.
like it's always been the case, but we've kind of like turned a blind eye to it because it's like engineers need to have administrative access and all this privileged access to do their job. But now we're giving those creds to the agents to go do the thing. So the risk here is different. I think it's a fundamental and material shift in the risk associated with developer workstations.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's one of those, like, we cannot treat agents in the same way that we treat our developers who, by right, like, and this is where, look, if everything in a company was perfect, we probably wouldn't need people anyway. So there is this just like nous to every business where that specific developer gets access because they know this and we know they wouldn't do this, and this is part of, they signed this document and it doesn't mean crap. But the reality is there's a huge inconsistency in terms of how that is treated, but it's not fit for purpose for agents at all, right? It is not even close. So I think if we roll out with similar policies, like, and I think this is probably going to be a year of like, what we've been doing as a business is just not fit for purpose from a security perspective to what we're deploying. We're rolling out agents, but our security, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we've invested into this security policy now is entirely obsolete because we need to change the direction completely because of how we build this company.
And to support that theme there, this is why I think as security leaders, software workstations really need to be considered as part of your production boundary, is because we've given developers the access they need to do their job. Okay, I'm fine with that. But then we're also asking them to pull down and experiment with models. Great. So now you grab something of Hugging Face and it has you got to run that model locally, okay, or you're going to deploy it into an environment where the identity of the developer follows them, or maybe a cloud environment. Well, that model is someone else's code off the internet, right? If you can still take malicious during the build phase of the creating a model, you create pickle files. We've largely moved away from that, but you can still have spiked models that are coming in that upon runtime execute malicious code. That's a problem. We're seeing as we're pulling in open source software, that's always been a problem. And we'll talk about supply chain security in just a second again. But now with agents, as we move towards agentic coding systems, you've got plugins inside the IDE. You've got models that are either running locally or remotely. You've got them pulling in software that you don't trust or you haven't validated. So you have all these compounding factors that are happening, and there's this real nexus of risk happening right around the laptops. So and again, I use that word laptop generically. This could be, let's just
Yeah.
call it your coding environment, because there's a lot of
Yes.
great hosted ones too. But that coding environment where all these things converge is a emerging risk. It's always been there, but I think it's finally moving up the risk register where
Correct.
security leaders, technologically forward security leaders, should be paying attention to. All right. So with that, Stu, let's get into your big three predictions for 2026. Walk us through them.
Cool. So I think there is a perfect storm that's going to create a record number of high profile incidents this year. Research tells me that 2017 was a pretty bad one, and 2021 was the one with the largest amount of incidents. So by theory and patterns, it should have been last year, running on the theme of fours. But I think we've created this perfect storm of um, distracted security teams. I think that, a lot of security leaders like last year realized, like, okay, guess AI is sticking around. That's what all of our energy and focus is going to be on. They forgot about the fundamentals. You have some of the most talented security engineers and CISOs getting out of the industry to go and start their own thing because it's never been easier. You have burnt out teams because hiring has been cooler because businesses have been worried about the economy. You've had businesses and like that have deployed agents and AI tooling with no readiness policies, no governance. And then on the other side of the fence, we're giving the other side nuclear weapons, right? Like the opposition, as we talked about, and we're talking about the Anthropic report as a good example, but like the tooling on the other side has never been better. And then the incentives behind it again remain the same. And we talked about this in a previous, which is like on the bad actor side, everyone on that team is working towards a common goal. We can't get half our teams to work towards a common goal, so we spend multiple day workshops coming up with a common goal. And so from my perspective, I think we've created this perfect storm of deploying things we have no idea about, forgetting about the fundamentals, tired teams, superstars lost, and super strong opposition, as well as the fact that like there is international challenges, shall we say, and lots of reasons for nation states to be chipping away at each other. And I think it's just created this perfect storm. And so from my end, this is a hard thing to quantify. But I know in 2021, I think the number was, I think it was somewhere in the region of, I think it was over 1,000 high profile incidents. I know 2017 cost the world $10 billion in damages. I think we're going to blow past that. And I think from my end, like it is just this perfect storm. And I don't think it's going to be great. And hopefully it's, I look at some of the challenges, critical infrastructure, hospitals, finances, the fact that like we are, a very fickle society and it only takes one bad day for people to start. I mean, look back at COVID and how people treated each other. It wasn't great. Yeah, I do think we'll see a lot of material incidents this year. Sound very Daniel Measler.
But I think you're right. I think we're going to see material incidents because we got a major technology change, a major business change. And so you have a lot of these tectonic plates. And then at the backdrop of everything, we have a lot of changes happening in our governments and the state of politics. So you have a lot of tectonic changes happening at the same time. So it makes a lot of sense that you're going to get an earthquake and the occasional volcano.
Yeah, agreed. We will hire for roles this year that didn't exist. Like they just did last year. Sam Altman posted over the holidays a role ahead of preparedness, right? Which is, I don't know if you saw this post. I don't know if you're familiar with what the role is. But it's essentially being ready to secure something that is continuing to evolve itself that we've kind of lost track of in terms of how this thing is evolving, right? So that is a role that no one has done, like, because it just hasn't happened yet. So right now, and they talk about the background in security and wanting to be at the bleeding edge and taming this beast. And I just think, like, from a business perspective, I think like we will continue to see new things coming up. Like last year, all was talked about was a forward deployed engineer. I think with the rise in these security companies, I think we'll see a forward deployed security engineer. I think we'll see businesses give up on AI because they haven't, like, the impatience thing, and there'll be essentially AI cleanup specialists, which will likely have to come from a security perspective, which is, hey, make sure that nothing was here. Because businesses, or even just like, hey, we introduced 50 different AI technologies. We want to get down and consolidate to one, scrub everything. I really do think that's going to be interesting. And then look, I don't know if it's going to be new. It might get rebranded or remarketed. But the amount of work that we're doing to build data centers to host this, I'm sure that there's going to be almost a new security function. Like, obviously, NVIDIA have but like, if we look at some of the businesses and how they're thinking about building some of these data centers, I think there's going to be a crossover type roles with the physical security aspect of it coincided with the cybersecurity side. And I think it will be I think it will be an interesting year for security roles to be rebranded. And I think the fastest mover in that, like, so these people will probably do pretty well financially. Across different industries, there are new roles. We've seen the rise of, like, the GTM engineer, which is essentially a clay expert. But, with new technologies comes new roles, and fast movers tend to do quite well financially. So I would encourage people to keep tracks with what is coming. And then, look, last year we saw a bunch of mega deals, right? How correct, like Wiz, CyberArk, ServiceNow made two pretty big plays at the end of the year. They're almost kind of, I don't want to say they were forgotten about, but they kind of bought on Armis, MoveWorks, and I think we're pretty close to $100 billion when all is said and done. And Mike Prevedi is always at the forefront of this, but it was just a huge year and way crazier than we expected from a deal level perspective. And I look at this almost like the pharmaceutical industry now, which is these security startups are creating a drug, right? Like they're doing the R&D, and in the same way that Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Novartis have grown, you guys do the R&D. Here's as like a check that founders can't say no to. I feel like every founder has they feel like they want to take it all the way and ring the bell, but 20 billion is 20 billion. And, I just see the bigger players, Microsoft, Google's, and Ross, I always butcher his last name, Haliak, I think is his last name. He drives towards the fact that we'll only ever have 7 security vendors, right? Or whatever it may be. And I look at, ServiceNow was not in that list for what it's worth. I don't think so. You look at businesses like this and you're like, okay, well, what are Amazon going to come to play? Microsoft going to come to play next year? What's left in Google? Are a business like Salesforce going to start getting into this world? Like, because ServiceNow, it's kind of similar background. So I think it's going to be a really interesting year. And I do think we'll see a lot of 10-figure, 1 billion, 4 billion transactions for businesses that are a year, 2 years old, and they're essentially a think tank, and they're buying AIR, they're buying market share, they're buying branding, and I don't think it's going to stop.
It won't. I think you're absolutely right. I think when Ross, who writes The Ventures in Security, talks about this, it's about following the model of the defense industrial base, how that
Yes.
collapsed over over 2 decades. And it really consolidated around those 5 to 7 players you're referring to. And I think that's a really good mental model to keep in our heads. It also makes sense if we tie it into what Daniel Measler was saying, where we're going to have this desire to have these more generalized platforms where the agents can handle more of the new, where agents are doing more of the work. So therefore, we just need really good scaffolding. We don't need
Yes.
point products. So I can see a world where like your Palo Altos and your CrowdStrikes of the world are, and your Googles and your hyperscalers are actually going to get into this space. And they're going to say, we have the compute, we have the infrastructure, we have the ability to deliver. We need flexibility. Grab these point solutions, get the talent, get the technology, get the customers that come with them. And then we're going to fold them into what will come like the basically security
Yeah.
fabrics that you'll build on. So I think you're dead on there, mate. I think this is going to be a good year for that. It is definitely a good year if you are a startup and you've got like 5 customers, five
Yes.
paying customers, you got a bit of product market fit. It's going to be a good year for you.
And investment banks, because guess what? They do pretty well out of these situations too.
Yes. The only thing I wanted to wrap up there was on the middle one, you talked about how we're going to hire for roles that don't exist yet. My encouragement to everyone is to, as you're saying there, Stu, is to be really flexible and kind of leave titles at the door and start thinking about where your skills and where your capabilities are, because you can steal from a lot of prior art. Like when someone says head of preparedness is going to run OpenAI, I hear disaster recovery and business continuity, right? So there are skills and concepts that you may have developed over a couple of decades, but they're going to be
Yes.
titled and positioned differently than they were 5 years ago, but some of the core principles are still going to be present.
Yep. It's all about marketing. It's all showbiz.
It is. All right. So we're going to wrap this up here. I've got 3 predictions for us coming into 2026, and then we'll wrap. So the first one here is around supply chain security. So my prediction is that agentic coding systems will become the norm. And is the resulting in supply chain security will be a material budget issue in 2026. What's going to happen here? 2025, a lot of forward looking technology companies were looking to see, can I bring in the right technologies to go from my product team to writing a PDR to generating code to have an engineer lay eyes on it to then write production code and then go forward and do go through a build pipeline and get into production. And ultimately, we're trying to push to see, can we go from concept to production with as few people as possible? Again, we're in the early stages of this, but I think now, specifically seeing how AI is working so well with benchmarks and how is it such a technology centric problem in a technology centric culture around this, saying we're going to see more of this. So in 2026, you can expect agentic coding systems to become the default, become the norm. And what I think this means for security leaders is you're going to quickly expose how brittle your software supply chain ecosystem is. So ultimately, you need to step in if you haven't already and double down on your software supply chain strategy. Get really good at that. Bring in the right partners, bring in the right methodologies for this, because you really, as a CISO, have an opportunity to help the CTO win and execute on this. And at the same time, bring down the security risk that you're carrying inside your products. So again, supply chain security is going to material budget for 2026.
Yeah. Hot ticket, hot item for a lot of smart folks.
My second prediction here is really around in this year, we will have our first case of documented insider threat and espionage targeting an AI lab. I think we'll go as far as like we will have cover of the New York Times, we will have the Justice Department releasing indictments because foreign adversaries were attempting to get into Google's DeepMind. They were attempting to get into OpenAI to steal the model weights specifically. We know industrial espionage is always happening, but because of the arms race between the US and China specifically and the tension there, they're really going to focus on trying to get those. Now, the reason I say this is the year that we're going to see the first moves on this, it won't be the last one, but the first real moves on this is because of the predictions put out by really smart people last summer when they dropped AI 2027, where they predicted 2027 was the year of AGI.
Yeah.
An incredible article, it's incredible website to go explore and go deep in all the research they did there. But they predicted this would be the year that we see this. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due, but I really think we will see a headline item which goes back into what we heard earlier from other security leaders around this insider threat. Similar concept. So, how do you mitigate this? How do you respond to a world where you know insider threat's going to be a material risk and you know you're going to have industrial espionage? Apply the zero trust strategies we've been knowing that we've needed to apply for the last 5 years. Remember, NIST dropped the SP 800-207 in 2020, and the executive order came in from the White House in 21, and it said you have to move towards zero trust. The vendor market said we're going to make it a product. It is not a product. It is an architecture that's part of a strategy. This is a great year to go after that. So go forward. The third thing I will say that we will see by the end of the year is we are going to see tier one cyber insurance carriers. They're going to introduce specific AI liability riders or exclusions, and they're going to require evidence for formal AI governance committees before they're covering the losses related to AI hallucinations or agentic negligence. We are going to see that phrase agentic negligence throughout the year. Watch it. We'll be there. I'm happy to put my hat on that one. But look to see the cybersecurity market move forward on this. When you think about what are the levers that we have in industry to really affect change, it's typically affect change consistently across the board. It's really one of three things. Either there's a change in consumer, whether it's B2B or B2C or B2C, doesn't matter. When there's a change in consumer sentiment, that creates pricing pressure. So pricing pressure is one. We don't have that in AI right now. There's no pricing pressure.
Yeah.
The second thing is it could be regulatory. It could have a regulation that's going to come out. You can have these things where governments are demanding that you hold things. We're seeing that in Europe. We're not seeing that in US. Therefore, it's uneven. We'll see what this year brings with us. So we'll give her a half point for that. But the third one is the insurance market. At the end of the day, if you're trying to cap your downside, the way you do that is with insurance. So this is the fastest way for a market to respond when exogenous risk is introduced. So I really think we're going to start to see, as the adoption happens for agentic systems running businesses, we will see the insurance providers following quickly to say, okay, if you want us to cover your losses, we need to see you have this level of hygiene, this level of governance, and this level of auditable artifacts that we can look at. So we'll see that going into next year.
And they still won't pay out.
Depends who your carriers and depends how you
That's
manage
true.
it. What I find interesting about insurance, though, is that this will largely be a conversation where you'll have the legal teams, the finance teams, and the security teams, maybe even the privacy teams, wrestling with the insurance agents to do this and get the carriers to get good pricing, to do all the things. But the risk is going to be introduced mainly by the engineering, but mainly introduced by other teams who are not in that room. So as a CISO, it's going to be an interesting year where you're trying to both bridge the gap between the needs of the lawyer and the accountants and the CTO and the business leads in trying to navigate this.
I know that the privacy council space was a really hot space, particularly when, GDPR, CCPA were big drivers. I could see an AI security council being for sizable companies being relevant and interesting, particularly in certain kind of matters such as this. I'm talking Fortune 500, huge corporations. I don't think that a 12-person startup's going to have an AI security council.
No, they definitely won't have that specifically. I agree with you there. It'll be interesting to see the involvement here, the evolution of this. We have the rising of the chief AI data officer. That will come. We'll definitely have that in the market. But again, that's the void. That's separate than risk mitigation, right? That's great in there. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I think this is going to be a really good year. I don't know. I started this year and I was feeling really optimistic. I know we're only 7 days into this year, but so far my optimism is pretty high for 2026, even given the fact that half the things that we predicted were downside. Bad things are going to happen.
That's why we're still happy, because they haven't happened yet.
There you go. That's it. I'll leave this up. I think we should wrap up here in a second, but I just want to leave this one thought that I've been sitting with over the holiday break. And that is, when we looked over the news, if you were to take a news sentiment over last year, it was pretty gloom. It's pretty down. AI was very much about the consumption and taking away, reducing of jobs, taking away things. If you're a leader in a company, I think this is actually a really good year to have the courage to grow. We now have access to more computation, more intelligence. We understand this technology better. We have the opportunity to do things better and do things differently from a security leader or business leader perspective. So maybe that's my parting thought as we leave on this podcast today, is have the courage to grow professionally, in your profession, and across your career.
Love it. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back.
All right, till next time, thank you for tuning in to Zero Signal, and we will see you next week.